All right, everyone, we're back with another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. And on the line today, I'm joined by Keith, who's a Canadian polyglot and a language teacher of more than 20 years. So, Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we've obviously been following your Facebook updates about all the stops in the Starbucks and the 6-shot ventis and all that takes. But why don't you take us back to where you began with languages and found that passion?
Where I started?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess going way back, my mother is from a Ukrainian family. And in Canada, we have many Ukrainian immigrants, especially that arrived in the early part of the 20th century. So Mom spoke Ukrainian at home, and her parents never really learned to speak English. And what she instilled in me was an appreciation for other cultures. She not only enjoyed being a Ukrainian Canadian, but she appreciated other cultures. She always liked people from other places and other languages. And so she sort of helped me to understand that it's a great thing to connect cross-culturally. And then in Canada, when in school, normally English kids take French classes, or they did when I was a kid. And so I was taking French classes in grade 8. So I would have been about 14 years old. And my French teacher took me aside after class and said, Keith, I've got to tell you, you need to go to grade 9, but your French is terrible. And I just need to, I'm going to put you through to grade 9, but you must promise you will not take another language. You're going to have some kind of talent. Maybe you'll be a musician, or you could be an artist or something, but you are never going to learn another language. And I don't want you to be discouraged. It's just not your thing.
Wow.
And so I went to grade 9, but then I went to a different school, and the rule was at that school that you had to have some second language. So I did 4 years of German, all book work, and didn't have one conversation that I can recall in German in 4 years. We just memorized lists of irregular verbs and declensions and conjugations, and read "the cat is by the chair" and goofy things like that. When I got to grade 12, I had to fill out my curriculum, and I needed to take a few elective courses. And so I knew that I liked languages, even though my French teacher told me I was terrible. And so I took 1 semester of Spanish and 1 semester of Russian. And I was very sick that year. I was in the hospital for most of grade 12. And I did all of my 1 semester of Russian in 8 days.
Wow.
But I really loved Spanish. And my Spanish teacher kind of reversed the whole thing, took me aside after class and said, Keith, you could really learn this language. You just seem to get it. And something happened. Plus, there was a really cute Chilean girl in my class. So, the encouragement of my teacher and this hot Chilean girl, I was motivated. And that's what got me started on Spanish. I got married right out of high school, not to the Chilean girl, but to a nice gringa. And we got involved with refugees because Canada is a country that accepts refugees from all over the world. So we were helping Vietnamese people and Ethiopians and Polish people and a lot of Latin Americans. And I had my 1 semester of high school Spanish, so I could say the pencil is red and the cat is by the table and useful things like that. But I started with that. I spoke Spanish every day for years, actually, constantly speaking Spanish. And I was really young because I got married when I just turned 19. And I was motivated and I was young. And I didn't study Spanish very much, but I learned to speak it really well, to the point that if I'm speaking Spanish, native speakers will ask me if I'm from Guatemala or from El Salvador because my accent is really sharp. I'll always get busted. I mean, if I talk for a while, they'll realize that I'm not a native speaker, but my Spanish was very strong. And then from there, I went on to learn Portuguese and Esperanto, and I went back to my German. And I've just been very interested in connecting with people cross-culturally. One of the things I just posted on Facebook the other day, I'll show you on the video, and then the listeners, I'll describe it to them. But I have this little necklace that I wear around my neck. And it's a little chain with little wooden tags that I used a wood burner. And I put the names of languages that I speak on here in those languages. So it says Francais, Espanol, Deutsch, Tagalog, Ruski, Polski, Esperanto. Anyhow, I wear these things around when I go to Starbucks or whatever, and people see them and they start conversations with me. And that is really how I meet people that I talk with, is out in public. I start conversations with total strangers, and I'll speak anything, including Tagalog, which I barely know anything of at all. But if I hear people speaking Tagalog, I have to walk up and, I'll ask them, "Nagsasalita ba ikaw ng Tagalog? Do you speak Tagalog?" "Oh, yeah, yeah." And then they're very, very warm and encouraging people. Anyhow, so that's my language obsession started when I was in high school, especially. And now it's just all I do. I learn and teach languages.
What an incredible story. And I must say it's double incredible, because people who come to this point where you are now, completely in love with languages and obsessed with it, working it, breathing it, I mean, they usually start off with somebody being very supportive in life.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating that you started with somebody saying, basically a naysayer, right? Basically somebody saying, "You're bad at languages, you shouldn't do it." I mean, what kind of teacher is that? I had a math teacher like that. It was, I mean, no matter how bad a kid is, you don't want to kill every single dream in that area, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. But you somehow managed to bounce back, which is completely incredible. And I love the idea of the chain. I wish I had one.
My wife gave me a Christmas present. I just have to go down to the tattoo shop. But on my right arm, on the inside of my right arm, I'm going to get a list of 10 languages that I speak to some degree. And on the other arm is going to be 10 languages that I either don't speak much at all or they're on my list. I have a goal of speaking 20 languages at a B2 level by the age of 60. So I'm 55 right now.
Amazing.
So I'm going to get this tattoo. And then when I, hold my hand out to pay for my coffee or whatever, and then people start conversations. That's what happens now with the tags around my neck. I meet people, I speak, in Canada, you always meet immigrants, and there's always an opportunity to speak another language.
Right. Yeah, I understand that Canada is a great place for aspiring polyglots to live, because of the abundance of languages just available everywhere.
Yeah.
But you got to still take advantage. I mean, just because they're there doesn't mean that they just come fly to you unless you do something yourself, right? Like doing something for it. So when did you start? When did you turn it in from something you like doing, a hobby, sort of a learner, into a teacher? When did that change happen? I guess you're still a learner, but
two important events that happened. One is I worked before as a database manager. I managed a database for a very large printing company, and I learned how to program databases to some degree. And it wasn't a natural thing for me, but I learned to do it fairly well. And I also worked as a graphic designer, but the company that I was working for laid off about half of its staff in one day, and I was one of the people to go. And I had to figure out what I was going to do. I had been teaching a few language classes in night school, and a few business classes as well, like business management and business startup kind of classes. And but I went to Starbucks and I said, I'm teaching these classes in the night school, and we meet in the public schools when the children go home after class. So all of the adults are sitting in these tiny little desks that are made for, 10-year-old anorexic girls or something. And I said, I'd love to bring them to Starbucks, and I'll buy them all coffee, and we'll do our language classes here. And they just loved the idea. So I've been doing that for over 20 years now. And that's the only thing I do. I have no other job. That's all I do. And I have employees who work for me, and they teach classes too, in several cities in Western Canada. The other big event for me, where I really sort of solidified my decision about what my life was going to be all about, was a number of years ago. I was invited to be on Canadian national television with a few other Canadian polyglots. One of them, I think you probably know, Steve Kaufman.
Oh, yes. I think I've seen this, actually. Might even have. Was it where they tried to figure out what made a polyglot? Like they took the math or something?
Well, the documentary took a different slant than I understood that it was going to be all about. But Ultimately, they didn't have us talk very much at all, but we were there for hours. A group of us, all Canadians who were multilingual. I think the requirement was you had to speak at least 6 languages to be in this group. And this was really a turning point for me where I said, this is about the only thing I'm really good at. I'm not going to be a pole vaulter. My modeling career is clearly a disaster. I'm about languages, and more than languages, I'm about connecting with people. So I think that, for example, Russian is really hard for an English-speaking person. It is painfully hard. But I've got some Russian friends, so now I can learn this language. So I think that what most successful polyglots do is they connect with people, not so much with languages. And when I get a new group of students, I find that the people who are most successful are not the smartest people in the group, but they're the friendliest people in the group. And the reason that you speak English so well, and I know you speak other languages, is because you like to connect with people. You may be a genius, I don't know, but I think what it is that you like people. You just enjoy talking with people, and you enjoy, the English-speaking world and the cultures that it represents. And it's not that you're in love with phrasal verbs, because who is? I mean, learning English is pretty painful too. But it's a social experience. I always tell my students, language learning is a social experience, not an academic experience. So it's about connecting with people. It's not about memorizing tables of verb endings and stuff.
Right, and that goes all the way back to your Spanish experience with the refugees, where you had to, I guess, learn quickly.
For sure.
Sure. So how?
In the end, my daughter married a boy from one of the families that we met on the first day they arrived in Canada. Wow. So it was really, years later, she was, about 20 years old or so, or in her early 20s, and she told me that she was going out to see somebody, and she told me the name, and I said, "Is the last name this?" Yeah. Anyhow, she married this guy, and after we met in a taxi when they were little kids, that part of the family.
Wow, full circle there.
Full circle, yeah. It was really bizarre, actually.
So, is this philosophy of learning languages by using them, by speaking them, is something that I've seen a lot of very successful polyglots talk about a lot. But in practice, how does it actually work? Can you maybe share a little bit of your experience, maybe contrasting the Spanish with how you approach it today, what's happened in that span? Because to me, it's, and maybe the listeners are thinking the same, where, oh, you just speak the language and then you learn it. I mean, to me, there's a question mark in between. What happens there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think that what I did when I was, 19 years old and even 18 years old learning Spanish, and what I do now is really quite different. I think that if I'm tackling a new language, I can do it fairly quickly now. The first language is the one that kills you. You work really hard because you're not just learning a language, you're learning how to learn languages. And then once you've got that, you say, sure, bring it on. Italian, Swahili, I know I can do it. Some will take a little longer than others. But what I do, for me, the reason that the connection with people is so important is because that's what motivates me to learn anything at all. So most recently, about a year ago, I was in Starbucks, of course, and I heard some people speaking another language, and I couldn't quite hear if it was Serbian or Ukrainian or Russian, but I knew it was some kind of Slavic language. So I leaned in and I walked over to the table. I'm shameless. I'll walk up to absolute strangers and start conversations. And I had my one semester of high school Russian. And so I said, "Извините, вы говорите по-русски? Do you speak Russian?" And she said, she was so friendly, just to even, find somebody who appreciated Russian language and culture. Well, she moved over to the table that I was sitting at with her friend, and we just became great friends. She's over at our house about once a week now. She does some work for me in my office, and she's become great friends with my wife. But because of that social connection, now I'm interested in the language. So I am very, very fond of ASIMEL programs. I own just about all of the ones that are available in English and a few of them in Spanish and French. But I could never possibly get through an ASIMEL program if I didn't have some kind of a heart connection with people that I love. And so my good friend Paulina, I just love her to death. And so now when I'm looking at Russian verbs of motion and verbal aspects, and for me the most painful thing in Russian by far is the floating stress. The stress is on one spot in a word, and then in another part of the conjugation it's in another spot, and it just seems so completely random to me. I could never do that if I didn't have a connection with a person, and that we sit and we have conversations and I hear how she talks, and I start to recognize that this sounds right, that sounds weird. So it's really the connection with people motivates me so much. If you were living next door to me, I would definitely be getting myself a Danish course.
Right.
And I would be trying little things out on you right away, and just moving it up a little notch every now and then, because it's all about the connection with the people. And I do start speaking from day one. I know there's other people like Steve Kaufman, who I respect greatly. He's very, very accomplished in his language skills. He prefers to study for a very long time, and then he talks about this experience of activating it. So he accumulates all this vocabulary and this understanding of the language, and then when he goes out to put it into work, it's just there. It's just passive. It's just waiting to be activated. That's just not my experience. In my experience, I speak like Tarzan. I speak in 3-word sentences, and every verb is an infinitive. Everything's in the present tense, and I just use words like yesterday and tomorrow, and to get my way around. But because I'm using the language that I use is the one that actually refines itself and gets better and better. So I speak really horrible Russian to start with, and then I speak a little bit. I'm having little sensible conversations, and in a year from now I want to be arguing about politics with somebody.
Right, you get those small successes that build onto greater ones.
Yeah, and using it all the time, constantly staying in contact with the language because of personal contact.
And I guess you said something about learning to learn. You're also learning what are those minimal viable vocabularies that you actually need. Let's say for any language, really. Once you've done that with a few languages, I'm going to need today, tomorrow, and something like that. So that's why you can jump straight into it, because you absorb those right away. I've heard other polyglots talk about that it gets easier the more languages you get to.
Have you ever studied Esperanto, Kris?
Yeah, I spent about a month in 2014 learning it, and then I went to a weekend in Berlin with Chuck and Judith.
Oh, yeah. Very cool.
And they had an immersion weekend where we only spoke in Esperanto, which was very bizarre because I only spent a month learning it.
Yeah.
But it was good fun, and at the end of the weekend I could speak. And today, I have a sort of useful Esperanto that probably minimally viable, but it's good fun.
Well, one of the first things that I learn in a new language is I refer to the Esperanto table of correlatives, like who, like kie, tie, chie, nenia, all of those things, and those are just such key words to talking in any language. Unfortunately, in other languages, they're not always that nice, tightly organized and recognizable from one to another. But knowing those words, who, what, where, when, why, this one, that one, no one, everyone, that's often part of what I'm thinking about when I'm accumulating my really beginner vocabulary in a new language.
Right. Yeah, those Chuck actually made a dance called the correlative dance, and we did that. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's about basically there are some gestures you do. I can't remember it now, but for instance, if you want to say ki am, then you point to your watch.
Cool.
Watch. So what time in a way.
Yeah.
And of course, learning Hungarian, they also have similar systems, but it's a little bit confusing because me is what in Hungarian. So Hungarian is extremely confusing for me because nem means easy in Danish and it means no in Hungarian, and igen means yes, but it's again in Danish.
Yeah.
So everything sounds like something else, and it's
Yeah.
highly confusing.
Wow.
So that's just takes practice, and but yeah, maybe I can find some information about the correlative dance. I don't want to do it
Wow.
any
That's interesting.
disservice for trying to butcher it here and there, but we did it in Berlin, and it was quite useful because you could connect the gestures to something that's slightly more, let's say, esoteric in a concept. And one thing you said, I mean, it's definitely true that because they're so regular, it does make it easier for you. But I also find that it's slightly difficult because they also sound very similar. So it's sometimes hard to separate them in your mind, I feel like.
Yeah.
But it's a very cool concept of Esperanto where you can basically, you get so much useful language for literally 5 minutes of studying.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can combine them and stuff like that. So yeah, I love Esperanto. It's good fun.
So as a language teacher, one of the things that I do is I try to make everything just about as simple as Esperanto. So last night I was teaching a group of students the Spanish past tenses. I'm not sure if you're acquainted with, in Spanish you have the preterite tense and the imperfect tense, and one of them describes events that were going on over some period of time or repeatedly in the past, and the other is events that occurred and they're finished. Well, most textbooks and most language courses teach this just terribly. I think if you wanted to be completely discouraged with learning the Spanish language, just try to learn the past tenses from a textbook. They're awful. Right. So I've thought about this, for 20 years I've been teaching this, and I have a particular strategy for teaching the past tenses. And I'm telling you, in 90 minutes last night, my students who did not know how to use these past tenses were talking comfortably in the past and accurately. They didn't make any mistakes. Wow. And because what I obsess about is how do I make this information accessible to another person? Not just talking, but how do I make it accessible so that not just that I can speak great Spanish, but I can make you speak good Spanish. And that's my other obsession. I mean, aside from collecting languages myself, what I think about a lot is how can I help people become bilingual? And now I've got over 1,600 people in my student database, and I don't know how many people I've taught over the years. But I've never met anybody that I couldn't make bilingual. Never.
Wow. And do you have any other sort of ninja, let's say, simplifications that you've done over the years that kind of revolutionized the way you taught a language or parts of a language?
Well, I'm thinking of these little tricks, if you want. I don't like that word, but I'm always thinking of ways to explain things in a really clear way that work. So one of the things I did is, in Spanish, there's two different verbs that mean to be. And for English people, this is very confusing. Ser and estar, and they're not interchangeable. You have to know when to use estar and when to use the verb ser. So I have a whole bunch of little tricks to teach, but one of them is a simple little poem that I will say definitely now that many hundreds, perhaps well over 1,000 people could recite in my part of Canada because I've taught it so much. So I teach my students, how you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. And it doesn't cover everything, but it covers 95% of everything that they need to know about this verb versus the other one. And if that's all they ever remember, they will be accurate most of the time. Whereas if they pick up a textbook, including the one that I used to teach from, there's pages and pages of uses of contrasting ser versus estar and sample sentences and exceptions. And nobody will ever remember that in their lives. They'll never know that. They can't possibly learn enough rules. You do not become bilingual by learning rules. It just doesn't happen. You become bilingual by using the language in realistic situations. And, one of the common terms nowadays, people talk about comprehensible input. You have to be roughly at the level where you are and just nudge it up a little bit. And if you're operating in that range, you can absolutely, a really dumb person can become bilingual. You don't have to be smart. I have met some real stupid people who speak more than one language. And, I shouldn't say stupid people, but I will say very uneducated people. We have immigrants in Canada who in their country, it wasn't common to have much education. And they came to Canada at a time when all they had to offer for work was their muscles. Hard-working immigrants who came here, and they speak, 3 or 4 languages, and they've got a grade 1 or 2 education, and they work as laborers.
Yeah.
So learning languages is not about being smart. It's about interacting with the people in your network, in your sphere, your social sphere. I
guess it's also because language is such a basic part of the human mind that if stupid people couldn't learn a language, we probably lost a lot of people back in the day, So what kind of you mentioned assimile you're a big fan of. Do you have any kind of methods that you advise your students to do in conjunction with the teaching, or is that supposed to be a sort of all-inclusive method that you show up and then the practice is where the real gain is, but you provide some coaching and guidance?
Well, I'll point them to resources that could be helpful. You can see behind me, I have a library.
I see.
And in front of me, behind my computer screen, I've got a wall of books here. I've got just about all of the living language series in the current revision. I've got just about all of the Teach Yourself books, anything I've ever been interested in or even curious about, and lots and lots of others. And many of the books, when I moved to my new home, I didn't have enough room for my books. We have 3,500 books in our home right now.
Whoa.
And what I did is when I ran out of room, I took some of my books and I cut the spine off of them right here, and then I ran them through my scanner. And I have a high-speed double-sided scanner. So in about 4 minutes, I've got a PDF of any book that I want. So then I put the PDFs on my iPad mostly. So I've got a lot of physical books, and I do, my students will say, hey, what do you recommend? I think having some kind of an audio program is helpful at the beginning for most languages. Spanish is an oddball because it is so phonetic. And for English-speaking people, it's so easy to pronounce. Everybody pronounces Spanish adequately in the first lesson or two.
Oh, wow.
But French is much more difficult for English people. There's sounds that we don't have, and the rhythm of the language is very different. And so I think that at the beginning, it's really helpful to have some kind of an audio program. Some people like Pimsleur. I find that really slow. I'm kind of fond of Michelle Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I did that to launch my Russian. So I'll recommend things like that. Some people will do homework. Most of my students will never, ever do homework. I assign it every week, but I don't count on them doing it at all. Some people do. And it shocks me every time it happens. But I honestly think the fastest way for the people in my classes to learn a language is to attend my classes, because I can get them from 0 to B1 faster than anything else that I know. Because that's all I think about. It's all I do. And I don't mind saying I'm terrible at a lot of things, but one thing I do well is I'm a good language teacher.
Right.
And I can get anybody to a conversational level in another language pretty quickly.
That's incredible. And also you're obviously resting on the many years of experience you have as learning the languages yourself. So you can pass on those aha moments, those 80% that make up, or the 20% of the knowledge that adds up to 80% of the use.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's fantastic. And
I also use gold lists. Have you heard of gold lists?
Yeah. I tried it once. For me,
your listeners who haven't heard of it, this is a system for learning vocabulary. And if you Google gold list on and find some sites that teach how that works, I found that really effective. One of my goals, I think it was about 2 years ago, I decided I would increase my French vocabulary by 3,000 words in 1 month. And it was insane. I mean, it was much more than an hour every day. And it was a little tedious because that was a little too fast. But I followed through and I did it. And my French improved dramatically. I mean, my vocabulary improved dramatically. doing that. So I'm fond of gold lists. I like an audio program at the beginning, but I always choose what I would call a pace setter book. So a course that I'm going to use as the main thing that I'm using. And these days it's mostly Asimil. I've got German here, and my second level of French. I got all the other ones here, Portuguese and Dutch, and someday I'll do Chinese. So I have a pace setter book, but sometimes you get bored. Like, even if it's your favorite program and it's the one that communicates to you the best, sometimes you just take a look at a completely different course. You say, wow, that was a different way of explaining it. And it just helped me to see it from a different angle. I always think of the colloquial series. There's a book called Colloquial Russian. It's the only book I've ever seen that explains stress patterns in the Russian language, which is the thing I was complaining about earlier, that the stress floats around. You never know where it's going to be. This book actually takes a stab at explaining how you can predict it most of the time. So, that, and I didn't find that in my Asimil course or Teach Yourself or Living Language.
That's cool. I'm using the Colloquial Hungarian book as my pace setter, and I totally agree with you that it's a very high quality course. I always worry about how much you get out of it when it's dialogue based, and it's always like, oh, you and your family and your 2 kids, and I'm 27 and single and stuff. It's hard to relate sometimes, but it's good to have that kind of variety, I think, because I can learn vocabulary using Memrise, or I can use Gold List as well, which I have tried. For me, it was a little bit slow, and I think maybe, although I did do the International Baccalaureate high school degree, which requires you to do all your papers by hand, I think I'm part of a generation where we basically don't write much by hand anymore. So for me, it was really hard to do gold listing. I was using it for Russian, so maybe that added to the pain of having to do Cyrillic handwriting, which is really complicated. At least, to learn it. And sometimes I couldn't read my own words because I was just, it's kind of funny. But yeah, what I mean is the colloquial series kind of gives a little bit of everything. And it talks about culture as well, which I think is important. Some kind of cultural facts, especially if you're visiting the country. It's nice to know about customs and all these kind of things that you might meet, maybe with eating or tipping or any kind of cultural norm. So +1 for colloquial for sure. And also they're very reasonably priced because the audio is free now online. Yeah. So you don't have to pay.
But I noticed that in Canada, the price of the books has gone up a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very, very substantially. The bargain in Canada, in my country, is the living language programs. So let me just grab one here. I will lean away from the camera for a second.
That's all right.
So living language in the current revision looks like this. And there's a sleeve on it. So I take the sleeve off. And then inside is a bunch of books. So there is essential, intermediate, and advanced. And there's a set of 9 CDs. So there's lots of audio. And there's even a notebook for you to write your own notes in. And this, in Canada, this is very inexpensive. I can buy these right now for less than 40 Canadian dollars. And, and Canadian dollars are lower than American dollars. So you can imagine, there's not very many 6-shot Americanos, and I bought myself another language course.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of material. I mean, it's 3 levels of language. It's 9 CDs of audio.
And it comes with an app or something too, right? Or some kind of online access?
Yeah. I don't use apps on my phone too much. And but I'm with you. I guess I'm just old enough that, or I'm just young enough that I don't write anything by hand anymore at all, except my language stuff. It's the only thing I ever write by hand. I write gold lists, and when I'm sitting down with somebody who speaks my target language, then I write notes. And more often, I get my partner to write notes. So this is a technique that's really important to me. I'll sit down with my Russian friend. The other day, my Russian's at the point now where I can tease her. So I was accusing her of selling pot to supplement her income because she wasn't making enough money as an English teacher. And so I'm joking around and I'm listening to the words. And what we do is we'll talk for half an hour, and she'll sit there with the notebook and write notes of things that I said wrong. So rather than interrupt me during the conversation and discourage me and correct every little thing, after half an hour, we'll stop and she'll say, I noticed that you put the wrong ending on the word pot because that's a feminine word in Russian. So you need to put this ending on. Oh, okay. So we talk for half an hour and then we review. I did this a lot in Brazilian Portuguese. I had a friend and we would go to Starbucks. We'd talk for 3 hours and we'd stop every half hour or hour or so and just sort of review the major points of what I did wrong, not every little detail. This for me was very helpful. And then I went away with my notebook and I could read the notes of things that I was doing wrong. Especially things that I was doing wrong repeatedly. When I'm teaching my students, I only correct 2 kinds of mistakes. I correct mistakes that are so confusing a native speaker wouldn't even know what you were talking about. And I correct repeated mistakes just so that they don't become fossilized and that you always, you're constantly calling the coffee la café. Well, it's el café in Spanish. So if you say that wrong the first time, couple of times, I won't even talk about it. But if you say it wrong, 5 or 10 times, I'll say, hey, I just noticed, Kris, you're making a mistake on this word cafe. So I want to highlight this. And every time you say this, I'm going to ride you on this until we get it straight because I want to make sure it doesn't get burned in your brain wrong. So that's what I want for me too. I don't want to be corrected in every little thing that I do wrong, but things that I do repeatedly or things that just don't make any sense. If I say something in Russian and the person looks at me like I'm on crack.
And that does happen in Russian.
That makes sense.
That does happen in Russian. I've done that with my tutor many times where I thought this is perfect Russian. It makes perfect sense in my head.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I understood sort of the words you were trying to say, but it didn't really make any sense.
One time I went to the bank. I was living in Vancouver and we have a very large Chinese population in Vancouver. And I was trying to talk to the teller in Chinese and she looked kind of puzzled. It wasn't going very well. And then she said to me, she said, are you trying to speak to me in Chinese? That's how bad it was. She wasn't even sure it was Chinese I was trying to speak. Right. Oh, man, that was a lesson in humility.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it hasn't stopped you, you might say. So you're still fine. You're still fine. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of language exchanges as well, apart from, of course, having the classes as sort of one big language exchange. Do you have any, when you have a language exchange, let's say for Brazilian Portuguese, did you then offer something in return, or was it just, let's talk Brazilian Portuguese for an hour?
Well, I have done almost no conversation online. I've talked with a few Facebook friends in Brazil or in Europe or in Africa in French. So I don't do that online, and I know that a lot of people do, and they get a lot of benefit from it. I just find that the face-to-face thing really energizes me, and that's what I thrive on. So I meet people in public. I make friends who speak other languages, and sometimes they want to speak some English, and sometimes they don't. My Russian friend, she wants to speak French with me. Okay. So, French or Spanish. So we speak either Russian or French or Spanish and try to avoid English. But she certainly doesn't need any help with her English. Her English is flawless, and she's an English teacher from Moscow.
Right.
Very, very talented teacher. Wow. She's amazing. But so it's not really a fair exchange. I tend to come out on the winning end just about every time.
Well, that's, the one thing that I really have seen a lot in these unusual, let's say, to find speakers of the language is that they just enjoy listening to their native language for a change. They might be living in an English world where every day they listen to English, and they might go home to their family and speak their language, but there's nobody outside their home that speaks the language probably, unless they're in some kind of enclave or something like that. And sometimes it's just a joy. True.
Yeah, most of my friends here are not here with their family. They're often students from other countries, and they speak English all day long. Sometimes they're here to study English, and they work very hard. They're taking classes and they're doing homework, and they're surrounded by English people. And it is such a relief to go out and say, oh man, finally I could speak Portuguese for a couple of hours. What a relief. So they thoroughly enjoy it. And it's also kind of fun if you haven't met somebody who's a foreigner who's really interested in your own culture.
Right.
Like, if you meet somebody in Budapest who is really interested in Denmark, knows a little bit about the country and the history and stuff, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
You just enjoy talking about your history and your family history and your national history. And so that's what happens, I think.
I'd love to just help people with language as well. If somebody in Budapest, and if you're watching or listening out there, feel free to write to me. If anyone in Budapest is learning Danish, again, it's tough to find a wife where that's happening, but people are learning languages all over the world, right? Sure. I would be happy to help them without any kind of reciprocation required, because I feel like it's my duty to share my language that I was given. I might not enjoy it more than I enjoy English, but it's my unfair advantage, right? It's the language that I can say I speak absolutely unconditionally native level.
Yeah.
So for me, if you ask me if I'd help you with Danish, of course I'd meet up and have a Starbucks and talk to you in Danish. That no problem. So I don't see it as a problem at all. I think a lot of people are extremely happy to just speak a little bit in their own language once in a while and blow off some steam.
I also find that, especially at the lower levels, the best teachers are not usually native speakers. So if somebody wanted to learn English and they had a choice of having you as their teacher or me, I would recommend you, because you have looked at my language as a foreign language, probably not for a long time, but you understand how this thing works from the point of view of somebody who didn't just grow up speaking it. And so they say, what the heck is a phrasal verb? Well, most English people couldn't tell you what that is, and they certainly couldn't explain it or demonstrate it. When do you use the words under, beneath, and below? An English person will just stare at you like you're from outer space if you ask that question. We don't know. But I'll tell you, my Russian friend, who's an English teacher, she will tell you. She'll tell you exactly. She will tell you when one letter sounds this way and one letter sounds that way. She understands phonetics and grammar, and she just has insight because she's looking at English as a foreign language. So when I'm teaching Spanish to the low levels, I'm definitely a better teacher than most native speakers. And sometimes students say, I've got to find a native speaker. Actually, you probably shouldn't.
I hear that all the time.
But once you get there, once you're getting to a certain level, like what you want to find to learn Hungarian is you want to find, ideally would be a Danish person who learned Hungarian, but somebody who learned Hungarian as a foreign language. Yeah. And they'll tell you, this is insane. Let me tell you how this works. And then you get to a point where you can say, I could go to Starbucks and I could ask somebody about their family and about their work and about themselves. And then that's when you want to make that transition. You want to start hanging out more and more with native speakers. But at the beginning, often a foreigner who speaks your target language well, even if they've got a bit of an accent, they're just so valuable.
My current tutor is a Polish guy actually who learned Hungarian as as a second language, and he's a great tutor because of that. Because there are a lot of times when he says, "This is what Hungarians would say." That doesn't mean that's the book form or the correct formal form, but he knows this is what they would say and this is why they say it. Yeah. So he can explain from the outside. And a recent example was, so Hungarian has accusative markers at the end, like Russian, and they also have it in the verb. There are object verbs and there are non-object verbs. So if you use an object form of a verb, it's obvious that what follows must be accusative, because otherwise you wouldn't be using that verb. So sometimes they omit the accusative ending of the noun itself because it's obvious it's an object. Of course it's an object. So he said, if you were studying a textbook, it would probably tell you to use the full accusative ending, but he said nobody ever says it because it's already in the other information. So you'll never hear someone say this. And this information, I don't think a native speaker would be able to provide. I mean, they might say, if you ask them, how would you say this? They will say it, but they would never know the background or that it was supposed to be something else. Or let's say I read a poem and I see that ending. How would they explain that?
Yeah.
So I find it very valuable to have a non-native speaker to tutor me. So I definitely agree with that. And actually in Europe, some weird rule I didn't know about, but you're not allowed to put a job offer online where it says you must be a native speaker. Apparently apparently that's discrimination. I'm like, that's a little bit curious. I mean,
interesting.
It's not that I see where they're going with it, but it seems a little bit too politically correct for me. Like, if you want a native speaker for any reason, I mean, you can have one. I'm not saying it's the best option, but you can have one. What's the problem? But apparently it's discriminatory. So it's outlawed by the European Union, whatever the council is called, human rights or something. So you can't call it that.
Very interesting.
Yeah. When I saw it, I was like, this is not right. There's no way. And then I saw the clause or the declaration or whatever. And it's like, interesting. And then I Googled it, of course, like looking for native speaker on a job website. And there was like 200,000 results. So I don't know how well it's being upheld, but it definitely exists and it's a real thing. So
interesting. There's a new Facebook group that Ollie Richards has started about for people who are interested in making a living from their language skills. I find that really interesting because, of course, that's what I've been doing. I also teach a course on making a living from your language. It's called Better Jobs for Bilingual People. And one of the things, I think the most important thing that people need to understand if they're going to be successful at making a living is that your language skill alone is not going to be enough.
Right.
You need business skills. You need computer skills. You may need graphic design skills. You certainly need marketing skills. So the things that I did before I became a language teacher, I use them every day as a language teacher. I have my own database where I track all my students and I track their proficiency level. So I'll say, I met Bob when he was a novice and now he's an intermediate high. And I track everything with the database. When is their tuition due? And did they get a textbook? Are they interested in these seminars in addition to the classes? So all of that is the computer skills. The graphic design skill, I designed my own brochure, which I have right here. So, graphic design also paid off for me.
Yeah, that looks great.
And so these brochures are, all over the place now. But without those skills, just because I speak Spanish well, especially, I don't think I could make a living. But I make a living mostly teaching Spanish when there are native Spanish speakers in town trying to make a living, and they can't do it. Right. They can't get enough students. I think they also believe that because they're bilingual that they're naturally teachers, which is not true at all. Just because you can drive a car doesn't mean you can build one. So to be successful in making a living as a teacher or a blogger or managing a website or a membership group or whatever it is, you need to accumulate a whole bunch of skills. You need to read a few marketing books and business books. You need to be sharp on your computer skills. You need to have a website.
Yeah.
I did my own website. I learned HTML and I'm always upgrading that. Without that, you can't make it.
Luckily, technology is making it easier and easier for all those things. But I totally agree. If you want to you can do a little tutoring hobby side business, right? Where people show up and they do an hour for, $15 an hour, whatever. But if you want to do serious classes and take it to the next level and build a business, it's not just teaching and it's not just knowing a language. You also need to do your homework and you need to learn how to market it and do all these things. So I guess in other words, it's kind of a warning to people who want to to really take it to the next level, but also a guideline in a way, a recipe of how to do it. So if people are sitting out there, this language over coffee concept sounds pretty cool. I'm wondering if maybe they've been tutoring a little bit online or something. Maybe they can take it to the next level with the right teaching and guidance.
Yeah, the truth is very few people could. So I never really worry about being overrun by my competition because I am just such an unusual combination of skills and with an unusual history that without it, you could do something. You could, there's other people who are teaching and stuff, but I don't think anybody else could do what I'm doing because I just have a particular select set of skills that fit this particular model really well.
You have a little bit of
those other skills, you couldn't do it.
What if you have, do you have any tips for people who maybe are teaching right now and they're doing okay for themselves, but maybe they want to know some tips and tricks on how they can expand it? Let's say they're just teaching one-on-one. Should they move to teaching small groups, stuff like that? Is that a natural evolution for a teacher? And if so, are there any things they need to be worrying about at that stage?
Well, I can make some personal comments. I have employees who are really good at teaching one-on-one. That is not my strength. I can do it, and I'm doing it now. But for me, there's something about the dynamic of the interaction between people that brings the whole thing to life. So I'm always teaching groups of 6 people. And so I have the students talking with one another, and they can pair off, and I don't have to be constantly the source of all of the information and all of the entertainment. I'll teach. I always have a cycle: presentation, practice, and production. This is a really common thing that first-year teachers are taught. So presentation, I'll say, okay, hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about the family. Here's all the words for brother, sister, uncle, and whatever. And here's how you say great grandfather and how you put the great thing on and how you put on step brother, stepfather. I'll teach all of that. And then we'll do something that is practice where it's very difficult to make any mistakes, some kind of an activity. And then production, where they do a lot of talking amongst themselves. So one-on-one is much harder. I don't think that people can generally do hours of one-on-one.
No.
And if they do, I think everything after about an hour and a half is mostly a waste of time. But in a group, it's different. The dynamic is really different. And you can enjoy it for a lot longer. It's not as tiring. You don't feel on the spot as much. So for my personal preference is to teach small groups, a strong preference over teaching one-on-one.
I can understand that.
That's really more of a preference than to say, I've got some kind of insight that's true for everybody.
Right. You need to also figure out what your teacher profile is. If you're sitting out there, are you more into group teaching or are you more of a one-on-one? I did the one-on-one tutoring online for a while just to supplement my income a little bit. And it's so draining. I know that some professional tutors online do a full week, 40, 50 hours. And I'm just like, after 2 hours, my brain was mush. I don't know what I could do. I mean, to be fair, it's slightly easier to be the teacher than it is to be the teachee. After about 45 minutes of Russian, I'm dead. Anything you say to me in Russian after that, I'm just like, I have no idea what you just said.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I think it's also important to be able to put together a lesson plan. When I'm interviewing somebody who wants to work for me, I'll say, okay, tomorrow I want you to teach the students how to describe their families. Tell me what you're going to do. And they should have some kind of a clue, but I can teach them how to do it better. And I think one of the keys to being successful as a language teacher is you have to have some templates and to say, I know exactly what to do. I mean, I can go to Starbucks to meet my students with no preparation, and I could sit down with my notebook because I've been doing it for 20 years.
Sure.
And I'll write down 6 bullet points, and I've got a real good lesson. It's not just that I can, fake it and, put out some crap and pass it off as a lesson. I mean, I will give a good lesson. but I know exactly that. I know that there are 3 pieces of every lesson that I teach. I know that I will always include these things. I know that when I'm teaching the past tenses in Spanish, I know exactly how I'm going to teach it. I know how to teach verb endings, but you need to be able to put together sensible lesson plans that fit together in a cohesive whole. And it's not enough to sit down with a student and say, let's work through a book, because they can work through a book on their own. They need a teacher who can explain difficulties, who can coach them and help them to avoid common mistakes and help them to accelerate much, much faster. If your teacher doesn't help you speak the language a lot faster, you're wasting your money.
Right. That's what I do with my tutor in Hungarian. Is I told him, it's nice that we doing vocabulary and stuff, but I said I can memorize 5 hours a day if I'm forced to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that, but let's say I do 30 minutes a day. That's more than enough to learn several thousands of words in a year. And I told him, what I need help with is this ridiculous amount of endings and grammar that's in the language, because I can look up in a grammar book, but without context, it just doesn't stick. I mean, you can't learn tables. You'd have to drill them for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
And we've tried that. That's horrible. So basically what we do is I just try to produce stuff. And every time there's an ending and stuff, he explains why it's this ending and not that ending. And sometimes it's even a philosophical discussion, because Hungarians might they might have a different spatial culture, which is really interesting, that they consider something, whether it's on or next to or besides, and that's where I really get the value out of my tutor. I don't get the value by him telling me that Ferfi is man, it's like that. I could look that up myself.
Yeah.
So we just try and be productive and go kind of I guess it's a patching way, because I try to say something and then we sort of work towards the correct answer. And he doesn't just spill it out and say, this is what you should have said.
Yeah.
He's like, he types most of the word and then I can see, I didn't get the ending quite right. And then that process makes me think more about the endings all the time. And so there's such a personal experience, and obviously you can do it in a million ways, but for me, that's a perfect balance of the things that I can do myself easily, vocabulary. We don't need to spend any time on that whatsoever. I mean, he'll tell me some words, but we don't go through text and have like a vocabulary list next to it or stuff like that. It's not necessary, because I can do vocabulary lists until I drop, it's
exactly.
Very easy. But anyway, it seems like time has flown away from us, and it's getting a little bit late here. So I want to thank you for sharing all your great knowledge and your story. It's amazing to hear how you could have such a naysayer in the beginning, and I guess you showed her or him.
It was her. I would like to bump into her and talk to her in French now.
Yeah, you showed her for sure. So thank you so much, Keith.
Mention it all. It was nice chatting. It was nice chatting. I really appreciate your podcast. And for anybody who's listening to this for the first time, you really do want to go back and listen to a bunch of other episodes. I know that one of the goals is to give, tips and tricks to help you learn languages. What I find mostly that you're especially good at, Kris, is the motivation side. If you're feeling kind of, lazy or disinterested, or you're saying, what's the value in this? You just listen to a few episodes of Actual Fluency Podcast and you'll be into it again. You say, that is really fun. That is really cool. That's really interesting. And you'll hear a lot of different people with different approaches and different insights, and something will be really helpful for you.
Well, thank you so much for that. That was really amazing. And that's also one of the reasons why I started it, is to inspire and motivate on a weekly basis, because as I think we alluded to in the beginning, about how to learn is more about how you keep learning. It's the motivation is such a huge part of it.
That's for sure.
And I talk a lot about motivation recently, but some of the powerhouses of motivation, 33 with Alberto is a powerhouse. He's a beast.
Oh yeah.
If you've ever seen Alberto Arrigini on Facebook, he's up at 3:45 a.m.
Yeah.
And, he's going to the gym at 4 or 5 or something like that. And he has his own business, his own language learning business, teaching Italian, and he's learning 2 new languages. And So 33 is for me my personal favorite of motivation, but thank you so much for that.
I will never be awake at 3:45 in the morning.
Well, only if you haven't gone to bed yet.
Drinking too much coffee or something.
Right, unless you haven't gone to bed yet, which happens once in a while. But yeah, thank you so much, Keith. It was really nice to connect after we've talked a little bit on Facebook. So
nice talking with you.
Stay in touch.
One thing that I got a sense of was that even though I was living in Hungary, even though it was just as Hungarian as it could be, I still kind of felt like I was living in a bit of a glass box. You know, that it was there, but it couldn't quite reach me. Most of the people that I knew were still foreigners. I was still very foreign. With VPN, I was watching foreign TV. I was spending foreign money, this kind of thing, you know, and that was a little bit of a disappointment, actually. And I met a lot of people who lived in Budapest who had a similar experience. And I guess the difference was that when I saw it as a problem, they didn't see it as a problem at all. They saw it as kind of part of the experience.